I would always say what I say to my students all the time, I think listening is the most important thing. You can be only a good musician, and I'm totally sure you agree with me also, like being a physician, like when you are able to really deeply listen.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. I opened up my new copy of Z'ev Rosenberg and Stephen Cohen's A Ring Without End, and I read the words, living in coherence with change. That's worth hearing again. Living in coherence with change. Coherence, not resistance, not fighting, not ignoring or denying or struggling. Coherence. Living in coherence. I'm not even sure I completely understand what coherence really means. It's a big word, likely with some technical or perhaps philosophical meanings for those working on advanced degrees in subjects of importance and weight. But none of that really matters, because what matters is the pause of uncertainty that arises when I read something and it sinks in, like that moment when you notice you have something in common with someone that you thought you had nothing in common with. Our medicine, our work, it's about connecting and promoting the living in coherence with change. Sometimes that means unkinking a troublesome knee. Other times, it allows for the bringing forth of new life. And there are other days it means sitting with an unavoidable loss, which is as much a part of life as purring cats, just hot enough coffee, and the recognition that it all arises and passes and arises, and as the title of the book says, a ring without end. Coherence, when I feel my way into the word, suggests a kind of connection, like the surface tension of water, or the way musical notes create a mood, or how you know to react to something by first not reacting, but allowing a kind of resonance to soak in before firing up the machinery of meaning-making. Finding coherence with change implies an understanding that it's more web-like than linear. It means knowing the tide, so you know whether to sail or wait for a turn in the flow. Coherence means being friendly enough with what's unfolding that it's possible to gauge whether it's possible to engage, like knowing when to lean in for a kiss or have a clear way to the nearest exit. Change is inevitable, and how we choose to dance with it, that makes all the difference. Are you engaging through a set of rules and beliefs, or through emotional reactions, or perhaps working in the service of mythologies picked up along the way? Coherence, it invites connection. Not merging, not surrender, something more like a conversation. Something that invites both stillness and action. It's the glide in productive friction. It's what keeps musicians in a swing, lets you know whether to fight or flee. And like the surface tension of water, allows for interaction with everything. Coherence, I suspect, is a kind of connective principle that you can find in the body as it's expressed in the fascia, in relationships as it's expressed through the cycles of connection, disagreement, and repair, and in the wider world when you zoom out on weather patterns, political tides, economies, and the tango of yin and yang. There is a music that comes out of the dance of change. And in this conversation, we sit down with musician and music educator Christoph Wiesendanger. He's found his way to the study of East Asian medicine not to become a practitioner, but to further his understanding and expression of music. I always love conversations with folks from other fields of study and practice, especially when their work illuminates ours in unexpected ways. Get ready to improvise? Here we go. Qiological Conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. You have clinic challenges? Our sponsors have solutions. Blue Poppy offers same-day fulfillment and free shipping on orders over $50. Looking to reimagine your clinical practice? Consider the study of nature's design with Ed Neal at the Apricot Grove. Need to send a custom herbal formula to a patient? Sun10 makes it easy for you with their direct delivery service. Later in the show, Jane has helpful solutions to raising your clinic fees, and Golden Flower Chinese Herbs shares a journey of healing that I think you'll recognize. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Discover the harmony of tradition and innovation with Sun10. Since 1946, they've been dedicated to bringing the wisdom of traditional Chinese medicine to modern wellness practices. Their extensive range of herbal extracts and supplements is crafted with precision and care, adhering to the highest quality standards. Through Sun10's dispensary, healthcare professionals can easily create personalized herbal formulas delivered directly to their patients' doors. Experience the synergy of ancient knowledge and contemporary convenience. Visit sun10.com to learn more. Are you ready to rebuild your practice through an in-depth study of the original writings of Chinese medicine? Starting August 24th, join Apricot Grove and Dr. Edward Neal on a transformative journey into the roots of Chinese medicine practice. New to the classics, their Wisdom of the Cosmos class offers an ideal introduction to Neijing nature-based medicine. For those seeking a deeper immersion, their highly regarded 2-year postgraduate training in Neijing, nature-based medicine, and classical text archaeology provides a comprehensive pathway to advanced clinical practice grounded in the Neijing text. Come and enjoy a vibrant global community reimagining clinical practice through the traditional writings of the Huangdi Neijing and study of nature's design. Tuition assistance is available. Visit neijingstudies.com to learn more and enroll today. When it comes to running a smooth, efficient clinic, having a reliable supplier makes all the difference. That's where Blue Poppy comes in. From premium acupuncture needles and trusted herbal formulas to innovative solutions like their liquid moxa, a smokeless, low-fume alternative to traditional moxa, Blue Poppy has everything you need all in one place. And the best part, Blue Poppy offers free shipping on all orders over $50 with no restriction in the continental United States. For nearly 40 years, Blue Poppy has supported licensed acupuncturists with high-quality products and a commitment to exceptional service. Visit bluepoppy.com today and discover why so many practitioners trust Blue Poppy. Don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more. Christoph Wiesendanger, welcome to Qiological.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Michael.
This is going to be so much fun. We met each other some months ago at the Pacific Symposium in beautiful San Diego. I sound like an advertisement, but good God, the weather in that place is ridiculous. And we're at the Pacific Symposium, and we're hanging out and talking, and I come to find out that you are extremely interested in Chinese medicine. You've been doing study with our good friend Z'ev Rosenberg. Chinese medicine is something near and dear to your heart.
Absolutely.
And you're a musician.
Yes.
So, Christoph, I just love this kind of thing. You know, like, I'm a musician. I really love Chinese medicine, so I'm studying it.
Yeah, that's probably pretty rare. Yeah.
Well, you know, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the fun things about Chinese medicine, we're always talking about cultivating ourselves, like with other things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like music or poetry or writing or whatever. Here you are, a musician, you're cultivating yourself.
Absolutely.
With Chinese medicine.
Exactly. Yeah.
So How did that happen?
Yeah, it's a long story. But to make it short, it all started.
It doesn't have to be short. This is a podcast. We can
Okay.
We can go as long as we want.
Okay, so I think it all started like when I was a child. My father loved Chinese culture, and he I think this comes from his parents that were already like interested in all kinds of like Asian cultures. And so my father, he was always having books about Chinese culture at our house. And we had the I Ching, we had the Lao Tzu.
Oh, wow. You grew up in a house where the I Ching was laying around.
Right. Yes.
Wow.
We had this one like famous like German translation, probably one of the first translations ever from Richard William.
The classic.
And the classic, right?
The classic, yeah.
Yeah. And then we had, there was a whole bunch of series of like, there was the Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, there was Chuang Tzu, then we had the Lu Bu Wei, we had the Li Ji, and then there was like the Great Learning. There are many books on Chinese philosophy, basically. And
the greatest hits. Your father had the greatest hits of Chinese philosophy.
Exactly.
And you're a kid growing up, this stuff's just laying around. You're an inquisitive kid, like, what's this?
So I thought, I took out the books, and of course my father was telling me about this, and I must have been probably at about like 7 or 8 when I really got into it and reading like these translations. And I got completely taken in, it was like, I felt totally connected with it from the beginning without really understanding anything and knowing about the culture much. But I remember like reading like the Confucian classics also, like the talks, and the analects they're called, yeah. And I was like, yeah, this was kind of like almost like a philosophy that spoke to me at that time already. Like, okay, this is interesting to live after and to learn from it. And that's how all started.
Okay. How old were you when you read the Analects?
Like really, really getting into it was maybe like a little bit older, like 11 or 12. But I knew and I remember like being around maybe 7 or 8 that I read certain texts that I absolutely loved.
Yeah. This is really heartwarming for me. I want to share just a little piece of my background. I'm just listening to you talk about this, and this lights something up for me. My father was the one who always brought books into the house. My mother, she read magazines and stuff, but she didn't really read. Maybe she read some fiction on occasion. I don't know. But like the books in the house was always things that my father brought in. And sometimes it was fiction, but he was also into poetry. So there were poetry books laying around. He was into psychology. So there were different kinds of psychology books laying around. And, as a boy, I'm thinking back to like your age, I remember being 7, 8, 9, and it's like picking up the stuff that was in the house because it was interesting to my father. And there was something about that this is what my father found interesting. It made an impression on me. And it was a treasure to read my father's books as a boy.
I totally understand.
Yeah, it's so great.
Yeah, my father was interested in all kinds of things, so I can totally relate also like to the psychology books. And there were even like, we had science books, and then there was like also like the Blavatsky. I don't know if you know about Blavatsky. She was a Russian philosopher.
Oh,
she kind of like founded a school of like herself, and she had a lot of like pupils and students. I don't know how I would think about this today, but I remember I found it interesting at that time reading it.
Yeah. What was the name of that school of thought? It was like some sort of spiritual...
Theosophia. Yeah, it was like kind of like a spiritual theosophical society. That's
the Theosophical Society.
That's exactly.
Krishnamurti and all those guys were... Yes. Oh, wow.
Exactly.
It's fun being a boy.
Absolutely.
And reading your father's books.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, my father, he wanted to know more, and he started learning Chinese. And at that time, it was not easy to find a Chinese teacher. So he went to the university and he asked around if there are some sinologists or there are some students, who could teach him Chinese. And he found a woman, and I remember that this woman, she always came to our house for private lessons, and so she stayed sometimes the whole day, and they learned Chinese. My father learned Chinese, and they were reading and talking. So I heard the language from childhood on through my father's interest.
Yes. And then you went down the path of music.
And then I went down the path of music, which was also not such a clear decision from the beginning. I mean, I was always like, we always had music in our house because both of my parents, they are not professional musicians, but they both played instruments. So we had a grand piano in our house, and my brother played drums, and so we started like playing on all kinds of instruments. And my parents were listeners. They were listening to a lot of music, especially classical European music, a lot of opera, but also jazz. And so I grew up with different music, and I heard this, and I started to play what I heard. I started on the piano because the piano was always around. We had a harpsichord in our house, and that was easier as a small child playing on the keys of the harpsichord because they're not as heavy as the grand piano. So we probably treated the instrument not really well, but we we always tried to figure out what we heard in music and try to find the notes on the piano. That was my first experience in music.
Yeah. Oh, what a way to learn music.
Yeah.
The instrument is around. Music is around. How can I figure out how to play what I heard? This is, I mean, when I think about practicing medicine, there's a little bit of that sensibility. Like there's something here. I'm hearing something from my patient. I want to play what I heard back to them in the form of a treatment.
Right. Exactly. I totally see this relation. I also think that's something, of course, that you always improve during, of course, like doing it all the time. And as a professional musician, I would always say what I say to my students all the time, I think listening is the most important thing. You can be only a good musician, and I'm totally sure you agree with me also, like being a physician, like when you are able to really deeply listen.
Tell me about listening in music.
Yes, that's a really, really, really interesting question, because I do believe that there's never the same situation again. When you play a concert, or when you rehearse, or even when you practice, I think we have the notes, so to say, to put it in other words. We have the notes, and of course we can name the notes. We have a C, we have a D, we have an E, and of course we can name them. We can reproduce them on our instruments when we know the instrument. But I believe that my C, or the C that I play, is never the same C. Maybe from the outside you would think, okay, it's a note, it's a C. But I do approach music, or I try to approach music every day with this beginner mind to see, okay, I have never heard this note C, or never heard a C major chord, to put it very simply, and try to hear every sound anew and completely fresh every time I do play. And I think that is a really, really difficult task to do, but I think that's for me really listening. Not having an expectation of what comes to you as sound.
So you are constantly discovering music.
Absolutely.
Constantly discovering it. Here's a C. It's going to be different than the C that I played yesterday. It'll be different than the C I play tomorrow. That's a very interesting perspective, as opposed to C. I know what C is. C is this. And I can tell you the waveform, and I can tell you about all kinds of mathematical and ways that they create sound waves and works on eardrums and, blah, blah, blah. There's a technique to it, and that's C. Or C is a constant exploration every time I meet it. That is exactly
right
how I was taught to practice Chinese medicine. I remember one of my teachers would say that as best he can, when he sees a patient, even if he's seen them many times, especially if he's seen them many times, he would try to not know who they were when they first come in, right? To your point, seeing them anew, rediscovering what it is and who they are. And this, maybe not even rediscovering, discovering. It's not rediscovering, because rediscovering means you discovered it, you know it. So that like pre-thinking mind, it's beautiful.
That's a really interesting point that I would like to talk about it, because like making more, of course, I can come back to my story after, also like how I started learning like Chinese medicine. But I'm always thinking about that very interesting concept of qi, which is very often like translated as mechanism. Which is in of course it's there's this wonderful part in Ling Shu Wan that I absolutely love, where they talk about like that qi. And of course this character and the layers of meaning, I was always like trying to understand this meaning is so deep, and it describes exactly, I think for me, how music or how improvisation works. Because I would say like qi you could see as a mechanism which is an interactive relationship between the correct and the pathogenic qi, of course, which is this space. But there is also, which you can see in the character also, because I think it's a crossbow originally. So you have this firing mechanism also. And you have what I find a really beautiful word is incipience, which means like it's this moment, like when you play, especially when you improvise, what I normally do, that you have to anticipate what comes next. And it's this little moment before you choose the note which you want to play as next. And I think for me, there is the music.
Oh my goodness.
The music is, of course, it's there when you hear it, but it's also like a little bit before what you mentioned before.
It's there just before you play it.
Before you play it.
In between the hearing and the playing.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's such an important part of music. I mean, music is basically, it's very simple. There is action and there is pause. But in between action and pause, there is something in between. There's this space in between. And the better you listen, the better you discover the space in between, because you need that space in between for having a note. And every harmony, melody, and rhythm is based on that principle. And the more you start learning about like listening for what is in between or what is around the thing that is happening, which could be that incipience or that stillness, I call it sometimes stillness around the note.
I love it.
The better you can perform, the better you can play.
This also, Christoph, so speaks to yin yang. I'm not a musician. My brother's a musician. I play the guitar a little bit. I work at learning I shouldn't say I play the guitar. I work at learning the guitar. And it's fun.
Nice.
Most often, because I'm just a beginner, I'm trying to get the note. Like I'm paying attention to the thing.
Sure.
I'm looking to get the note. Can I get that C? Can I get that G? Can I get an F sharp? But what I hear you saying, and this makes so much sense, and I get it as a practitioner, not as a musician, that and we've heard this thing about, music is the space between the notes. Yeah, that's kind of groovy. Yeah, that's there. But the way that you're saying it is, if I can attend as much to the space and the quality of that as the note, now you've got the yin and the yang of what a note actually is, because you can't have a note without the space.
Totally, absolutely. And there's this I think the silence or the space, the silence and the space in between the notes tell you, that's how I feel sometimes in moments where I'm really focused or really in the music, tell you what could be the next note to play.
It's not the note that tells you, it's the silence.
Yes.
Again, I just keep translating this into clinical work because, I'm the clinician on the side of the conversation. And there's all the things that a patient says and all the things they don't, or maybe the way they said it, but left out a piece. I wonder what that is.
Yes. And of course,
here, I was going to say here in the West, we so often think about the empty space as nothing. And I think that's an error.
It is an error, like it's also very interesting, like what stays when you have played a note before the next note comes. Because there is something. There's not nothing. Because there was already a note. And I think that is really important. And it's all about, for me, it's all about the importance of awareness, of action and non-action.
Action and non-action. I just want to underscore that. Because so often I would think action and reaction. And there's that too.
Sure.
But action and non-action as a kind of a whole, as an inhale and an exhale.
Right.
So I want to talk a little more about non-action because, look, you and I are both creatures of the West, even though we've had plenty of influences of the East. I'd like to hear a little bit more about non-action. That really has my attention.
I think it's, how can I put it in good words? I think like when we play music, we have to take decisions. And every decision, of course, has a certain reaction. When you want to see like music as a field of energies, when you want to see music as a unique situation with different vectors of forces going against each other and going out, and there's a lot of decisions happening in the same moment when people play, especially in improvised music where you don't know what's going to happen, what's going to come, who somebody else, what the other musicians are going to put in. And of course, all these has consequences. It's something that I think a lot about in my music, or I try to get better with it, and I'm still far away from getting there. But like really to feel, when do I have to take action, which means a decision, and when I have to wait and just see what's happening. To open possibilities, also like when I play with other people, for the other musicians to bring in something that maybe they wouldn't bring because of my decision that was maybe too fast or maybe too early.
Or the decision to wait.
Or the decision to wait. And the decision to just listen.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic software management I use to keep everything running smoothly. So let's chat about timing for a minute, because when it comes to raising your fees, timing really is everything. A great time to roll out a fee increase is during natural, fresh start periods, like the beginning of the year. People are already thinking ahead, setting new goals, and adjusting their routines. So it's a good time to make a change feel natural. Or you might want to try it in September, when everyone's back in school mode and in the mood for a fresh start. For more tips on navigating fee increases, check out frontdesk.jane.app and look for the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. Jane wants to be a part of your journey in raising your fees with features built to help, like sliding scale adjustments and customized reminder emails. You can take a look at their pricing plans at jane.app/pricing. And if you're ready to get started with Jane, don't forget to use the code CHEOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. I don't know much about supposed quantum mechanics and new physics. I've read some books on it. I don't understand it. But I'm curious about some of the ideas that come from it, such as observing something changes that something. Mm-hmm. That there is no such thing as complete objectivity. And so even your quietude is an influence on what's happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's one aspect when we talked about this before, like cultivating ourselves through music. That's something that is very important, I think, I would say, for the old Chinese people. I think at least it's famous because the poets and the monks and all these beautiful stories that we read and enjoy, most of the times they had instruments also, like they had a jin, they were painting, they were doing calligraphy, but they were playing. And this music wasn't supposed to be for performance, or it wasn't supposed to be for playing together with other musicians or other people. It was supposed to be that you play for your own, and you cultivate your spirit, you cultivate your soul, you're putting in your experience, and you learn through the sound that comes back and that you play. So that's at least how I understand it, where you are in your personal development. This can be your spiritual development, but also in general your development. And I always loved that aspect of playing for yourself, to cultivate yourself and to discover yourself, because that's something that is people hardly speak about it, especially not in music education, because music education is always connected, of course, to going out to present your music to an audience, which is absolutely fine. And but I loved that aspect always, like to be with yourself and discover you through music. And that's what I try to give, hopefully, to my students, that the most important thing is, like, when they learn and study, that they have to discover themselves, to find a way how they want to play music, because there's as many ways as humans. That's how I think about it.
Sometimes people ask me what kind of acupuncture I practice. And I've studied a number of different traditions and methods. And at this point, it's a weird conglomeration, because how could it not be after a while? Thinking about music and playing the music, practicing, using it as cultivation, as a mirror, in essence, to see who you are in any moment in relation with the music. I mean, I really feel this with acupuncture, that it's a way of how am I attending? And in how I'm attending to my patient, it will call up in me responses that translate as either acupuncture points or a method, something I've already known and learned and used, or sometimes something I've never done before, which is both exciting, ooh, this has never happened before, and worrisome, like, I've never done this before. I have no experience. I wonder how it's going to work. It's always an edgy moment to do something new.
I totally agree with it. I think it's, learning. I think it's always like being aware of what's going on, listening deeply, and always try to find a new possibility in this very special moment that you're in. Because I absolutely feel, even when I'm listening to music, I love to listen to music, I mean, probably I became a musician because I was such a huge fan of music, because I just loved music, and I was listening to all kinds of music, and I just wanted to find out, okay, what is it, and how does this music function? And that's how I learned. And I truly believe that you can have good teachers in music. Of course, you can have good teachers, but I consider a good teacher not somebody in music who gives you a direction, but somebody who shows you methods and possibilities and, of course, principles, but then give it to the student and say, okay, now try this out and work with it and try to see what it makes with you. Maybe it doesn't make the same thing as it did with me. And in that sense, I truly believe that most of the great artists and musicians are, to 90%, they're self-taught, because you're always teaching yourself. You can learn the basics, of course, which are important. You can learn the fundament, And sometimes, of course, there's well-proven methods existing since years, since hundreds of years, that are absolutely worth to consider. And also, it doesn't make sense not to consider them. But at the end, at the very end, you have to discover you in what you do.
At the very end, you have to discover you in what you do. This is what makes it worthwhile. And this is what makes it fun. And this is what at times makes it infuriating and worrisome.
Right.
And it's so easy to not trust yourself because sometimes in figuring out who we are, well, we're not trustworthy yet, or we don't know it yet. It all goes into the mix, right? You have to have all of that. I have found, let me ask you this question. I have found with acupuncture, as I'm learning a particular method, because there are methods, like you're saying, there's scales and there's things you have to know, and it's important to know them.
Of course, sure.
So that you can get to the place of finding out who you are with that method. I find as I learn a method, I always rely on whoever's teaching it to me in the beginning. They like put a scaffolding up, and I can sort of follow in their footsteps or play along with them. How would they do it? I know how they do it. They do it like this. And if I stick with it long enough and begin to get enough of my own experience with it, I find that the method itself begins to teach me.
Wow, that's beautifully said. Yeah, absolutely.
You find that with music as well?
Yes, absolutely.
It teaches you.
I couldn't agree more, you know. And it always teaches you. It never stops, you know. You know. I think it's I don't know who said this. I don't remember. But I think like it's to accept the impossibility of your task and still do it.
Oh, yeah. It takes some courage, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it takes some love for what we do. I think that's very important.
I don't know how you get beyond the basics without some love.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So Chinese medicine, I mean, I get it that thanks to your father's books, you've had this influence, you know, and then you go and you learn your music, and the music starts teaching you about music, and you put all that together. But Chinese medicine,
of course,
how's that all fit in?
Of course, there's more to it. So I maybe have to, like, because I discovered beside the music when I was like maybe 14 or 15 years old, a Chinese martial art teacher came to Zurich, where I live in Switzerland, and opened up a dojo to teach Kung Fu and Tai Chi and Qigong and other things that he learned from his teachers in China. And that was also like very new at that time. So it was something that people didn't know. I think there were already some Kung Fu movies. Like most of the people, like they went into the martial arts also because of the movies, you know.
Yeah, it was inspirational for many.
Well, it inspirational for so many, and of course Bruce Lee brought it to the U.S. and so many other people, and then there were like all these Hong Kong, like the Shaw Brothers and all these famous movies. But I didn't discover these martial arts through the movies. I watched the movies later, but I discovered it through this teacher that we had, and I just took classes there, and I went through a pretty intense Southern Shaolin style Kung Fu when I started. And
how old were you when you started?
15.
Okay.
15 years old, yeah.
Yeah.
And I went there for about like, I would say like 10 years. And I really on a regular basis, like 3 times a week. And I remember that during the weeks, there were these classes where they taught like the movements and everything. And then on the weekend, there was like a fighting training also, which was interesting. Of course, that you want to put the learned movements into practice and see how it works. And I enjoyed this at that time very much. I was young and I tried all kinds of things. And I learned a lot from that school. And then, of course, I started to play music and I started to perform more, and I started touring as a musician. So I didn't have time so much to go, and I didn't follow that path so consequently. And then, like, of course, during like playing music, it was always in my mind, and I always like remember, of course, the movements because I invested already so much. So I did it a little bit for myself always, but not as consequent as I did when I was young. But then when I was about 49 or so, I thought about it really strongly because I wanted to bring back that experience from martial arts back into my life more strongly. And I called up my old teacher, and he wasn't there anymore, this Chinese teacher, but there was a colleague of his that was still at the dojo and still there.
Still there all those years.
All those years.
Dojo is still there.
Right, still there and still teaching. And I called him and then asked him, hey, can I come back and maybe see what do I remember? And maybe I can relearn it again, which I did. And I went again for the last 10 years. I went again through the whole program and still started to study all the things they teach there. And it was beautiful to see how much my body also remembered. And I was lucky, even with an older age, that I'm still flexible enough to do certain things. I cannot do anything, but I'm still learning. And of course, I'm mentioning this because that's obvious. Because when you practice Tai Chi and Kung Fu, then of course you learn about Qi and you start to learn feeling the Qi in your body. And of course that triggered my interest and I'm somebody who loves to study also. So I love books and I could spend hours on reading books and I started to, of course, I wanted to find out more about traditional Chinese medicine. And then I remember I had a little small book, the Huangdi Neijing, which was, of course, it was a really just basic, like some of the most important texts, probably from the Su Wen and from the Ling Shu, were inside in a German translation. And then I discovered Z'ev Rosenberg's first book, Returning to the Source, it's called. And I read it. And I was so touched from really every sentence that was in that book. It spoke to me immediately and as strongly as probably the Tao Te Ching and the Confucian literature spoke to me when I was a child. And I was really thinking wow, this is so amazing. How can you that's a life philosophy that totally fits me. And then I looked, of course, Z'ev Rosenberg up, and I saw that he's a practitioner, and I wrote him an email with not expecting to get an answer, but I got an answer. And I was asking him if he would introduce me to Chinese medicine and teach me, because I loved the book so much. And that was right before the pandemic, 2019, 20, something like this. And then we started to have those really, really beautiful online classes, which we keep almost like every second week we meet. And we didn't leave out much for the last 5, almost 6 years. And that's, of course, how I, thanks to Z'ev, he opened me up a whole new world that I didn't expect. I thought it's interesting, but it was I didn't know anything about it. And then, of course, through Z'ev, and he also told me which books that I should get. And so we started to learn and talk about the Su Wen, about the Ling Shu, about the Nanjing, about all this, about the Shanghan Lun, and of course, all these really, really beautiful texts that I started slowly to discover. And I'm still, of course, far away to know much about it, but I'm still learning and studying. And so that's how my Chinese medicine interest got deeper and deeper.
I love it. I wrote an email, did not expect an answer. And then he says, yes, I'll introduce you to Chinese medicine. It's so curious to me. I don't know about you. Much of my life, all the good things in my life, I think I can say that. I think this is true. All the good things in my life, I didn't plan them.
Totally.
I couldn't plan them. I couldn't imagine them. My imagination is not that good. But at a certain point, something comes along and it's like I get a hunch. Like, what's that? I think I see something. It's always from the periphery. It's never from directly in front of my attention. It's always something on the periphery of my attention. I kind of go,
Exactly.
what's that? It's like a little glimmer.
Exactly.
And all you gotta do is like shift your attention to look at it a bit and then follow it for a while. Holy smokes, it'll take you places.
Absolutely.
Or not. Sometimes it's just like, oh, well, interesting, but there's nothing here. Sometimes it's that too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But there's something about that, what about that? That just seems so potent. And it sounds like you had some of that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
With reading Z'ev's book, it just really was a glimmer for you.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. And I knew exactly, like, okay, this would be a person whom I would like to study with, like from that knowledge and profound depth that he has in his way of living and thinking. That was totally obvious for me, And I'm still, until today, this very day, I'm enjoying all the classes that we have together. And
oh man, that's great. Now, how has this affected your music?
Yeah, I would say profoundly, because it's very interesting. Sometimes if you step out of your zone, like your normal zone, and my normal zone would be music. And so if I step out of this, like through Chinese medicine, through martial arts, I get a perspective back, of course, on the music. I think I became a better teacher in the university where I teach because of learning how you study or how you talk about certain principles in Chinese medicine, to see and understand better how I can teach a content to my students in music, because it's a different perspective. And I think this helped me, because I think I couldn't, and the same with martial arts for sure. I think when I would stay only in the field of music, which a lot of musicians are doing, and that's totally fine, because that's just me, I need these other perspectives, because then I can understand much better what I do in my own main field. And then I think through that different perspective, I discover my own thing much better again. It's again this discovery, and again this inner change that comes through other things from the outside that help me to understand what I do better.
I am back to thinking about what you were saying about the silences that inform the note. The silence in the beginning, before the note, the silence after the note, right? This continuum of something and not nothing, but just more attending.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this to me is a principle of Chinese medicine, especially as we're having this conversation. But I feel like this is something that has taken me a long time to start to get a feeling for. I mean, I love the philosophical ideas of yin and yang.
Of course.
There's like dark and light, and these are not separate. They're complementary, unified. I'm uncomfortable with the word opposite because it's so confrontational. But there's a unification of complementary aspects that are constantly at each other's throat and have each other's back all at the same time.
Right.
And that's a beautiful idea. I remember hearing that kind of thing in Chinese medicine school. I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's so beautiful, right? Or the idea that like you take yin to its ultimate quietude, it will flip into active yang. I'm like, wow, that's so amazing. But this other part of me is thinking, how the hell does that happen?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? Because there's a real transformation. There's a real chi transformation that goes on there. And I have so few answers to the permutations of yin and yang, but I increasingly, I think, have more interesting questions about it. And it shows up in places like this conversation. It shows up in listening to you talk about how your experience of studying Chinese medicine makes you a different kind of teacher, because there's a perspective that you can bring that helps your students to learn to inhabit the music for themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think rhythm, would be a very interesting thing to dive a little bit deeper in, because I think rhythm is maybe the most obvious, where we can discern all those things that we were talking about, like, of course, what is happening and then the space in between. And I was always fascinated with rhythm first. That was the thing that fascinated me the most. And of course, I also discovered harmony after, which is for me all connected also to rhythm, because harmony for me is achieved through simultaneous voices, through simultaneous melodies. Harmonies are moments where melodies come together and meet and stay for a moment and then dissolve and go on moving.
Oh, stay for a moment and then dissolve.
And I feel the same with rhythm, but rhythm is in that sense much more deeper and much more complicated, because there's many different kinds of rhythms. And I think I can relate this totally, of course, to pulse reading. I can relate this totally to what I learned from an encounter that I had with an older Black musician in New York that I also contacted because I wanted to take a lesson with him. His name is Milford Graves, and he's a very, very interesting person. I mean, first of all, he's an incredible drummer, and I loved his music because he was playing with really great jazz musicians, with Albert Ayler, and when John Coltrane passed, he was playing with Albert Ayler's group at John Coltrane's funeral. These are just stories around him, but I mean, he was so much more than just a drummer, because I would call him a polymath, and he was very interested in the rhythm of the body. And because I was contacting him because I wanted to learn more about rhythm from him, and I wanted to learn what he does, that he sounds so good and so incredible, so independent, that he can have all these rhythms going together, and at the same time there's also independent, but they create a bigger emergent structure that is based on all little things that are under there. And then we met, and I visited him in Queens, in New York at that time. And then he said, okay, he wanted to record my heartbeat. That's what he did. And that's very, very interesting, because I think his work that he did for his whole life, because he was always concerned about the heartbeat, because he said, if you want to find your own rhythm, you have it. You have your rhythm in your heartbeat. And he recorded my heartbeat, and that was the first time in my life that I heard my heart beating, because after he put it on speakers and I could hear it. And then he developed a computer program where he transposed the frequencies of the heartbeat into notes that move around. And of course, when you transpose it, then it's a weird kind of chaotic melodies are going on and rhythms are going on. But
Celtic melodies and rhythms.
Yeah, chaotic. Yeah.
Chaotic.
Chaotic, yeah. I didn't pronounce it well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. And then he proposed me, if I really want to learn about my own rhythm, I should listen to that recording that he made, which was very interesting. And he would also because he knew that I'm an improvising musician, so he also proposed that I learn my own rhythm through listening and try to improvise around it and with it to get deeper into my own rhythm. It's kind of like a feedback back to your body, which he also used for healing people that had heart problems. So he recorded their heartbeat and he sent it back to the body, that the whole body with all in the skin and everything, put in the own heartbeat rhythm, made hearable through the recordings. That was a very, very interesting experience for me. And I think it's also very much connected, of course, with the body of us humans. Yeah.
Of course. I mean, it's the most primordial rhythm that we have, and we all have one. What was it like for you, Christoph, to hear your own heartbeat in that place? Like maybe for the first time, really listening to your heartbeat. What was that like?
It was very interesting to discover the irregularities in my heartbeat. And also, of course, we can come back to how our discussion started, like the space between the beats. I was enjoying this a lot. Of course, it was in the beginning, it was maybe strange. It was strange. It felt strange to hear your own, and okay, that's me, and that's how my heart sounds. But then you get accustomed with it, and I did this for what he proposed to me, what Milford proposed to me, like to do it as a daily ritual. Listen to your heartbeat and do it. And I did it for a longer time, maybe about 2 months. I did really follow his advice, and I was listening every day. And that changed my awareness for rhythm. I learned, it's hard to describe in words, because I think I learned more. I discovered subtleties the more I listened to, of course, because I got to know the rhythms happening. And of course, the more I was listening, and the more I also started to remember them, which is an interesting thing. And remembering, I mean, like, of course, in my memory, but also, like, I think in my body, I felt. That was very interesting.
Imagine this. A patient walks into your clinic. They're carrying more than the pain in their body. There's a story there. A history woven with the stress of long days, the ache of things unsaid, and the quiet longing for something to shift. You listen, not just with your ears, but with your hands, your intuition, your heart. It's not just about needles or a formula. It's about connection. Understanding the threads that tie us together, mind, body, and spirit. That is where golden flower Chinese herbs comes in. Rooted in tradition and crafted with care, their formulas are more than herbs. They're a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern practice. Every bottle, a quiet partner in your work, helping you to meet your patients where they are. Because healing isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about creating trust, cultivating belonging, and helping someone feel truly seen. Golden Flower Chinese Herbs, your partner in practice and connection, where tradition meets care. Of course, from a Chinese medicine point of view, we would say, oh, that's the emperor, right? That's the Shen in the heart.
The Shen, of course.
So there's that. I'm really touched by this when we're talking about a very kinesthetic thing, heartbeat. And I'm imagining this for myself. Sometimes I can hear my heartbeat. Or sometimes I like focus in on a little bit, like if I wake up in the middle of the night and it's quiet, right? And it's still, and I'm not sleeping. I can notice my heart, and it kind of freaks me out when I pay attention to my heartbeat, because I realize how ephemeral it is. And one day it will not be, right? And that's it. So there's something, when I think about listening to my own heartbeat, there's a part of me that doesn't want to. There's something a little frightening about it, and something incredibly intimate. And having this conversation with you, I'm thinking, oh, maybe I should investigate that a little bit more. Now I'm more curious about it. But I also know there's a part of me that gets a little weirded out listening to my heartbeat. Again, at the same time, hearing you tell the story and recognizing, oh, yes, we all have the unique rhythm that's ours.
Absolutely.
And that might be worth attending to a bit and seeing where that takes you, because we all got our own groove.
Totally.
And we carry it in us. And there's all this, there's all this variability in heart rate.
Totally, yeah.
In fact, high heart rate variability is a sign of health.
Sure. Yeah. I think in that term, I really would like to point out like Milford Graves' work, because I think it should be more known, and that's really great that what he did, because it was really his life work, I think, beside the music that he played. And it's interesting also, like in terms like talking about the irregularities that every heartbeat luckily has, and compare it to how music so often functions, in the sense, since we have the computer, so we have so much like computerized rhythms. And I was having this long talk when I was together with Milford, and he put it that far that he also said like that, like metronomized rhythm is not good for the body, which is a very interesting point to consider, I think, because like most of the music that we hear consciously or unconsciously, let's say, like, I don't know, like pop music that we hear all over, and of course techno music, and it's basically all based on measurable, quantized rhythm produced with the computer today. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because it can has. I'm not against it, and I don't want to say this is not an aspect that music can have, and certain music maybe it's the core of a certain music. But then on the other side, I think this is just one dimension that rhythm can has. And like, it's, I don't know, the increments of time contoured to abstract measure rarely match the rhythms of human action, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, they're flawless in their metronome, staccato, whatever it is. And without that, I mean, regardless of speed, as you were talking about earlier, when you're listening, regardless of the speed you're listening at, there can be I remember listening to like Zakir Hussain play the tabla. Oh my God, right?
Amazing.
You know, extraordinary and quick and rapid. But because he had the kind of attention you were talking about earlier in this conversation of being able to hear the quiet in between the pauses.
Absolutely, yeah.
At approximately the speed of light, it seemed.
Right. Absolutely fast hearing.
That brings a different quality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is it's very interesting. I think many music, has like many different layers of rhythm. You can it's not one dimensional. You can hear many different layers of rhythm stacked on each other, and you can discover this, or you can discover this. I think that's very interesting. Like when we listen to music, or the music at least that I love and that I like, it's this own personal, multidimensional, interactive moment of playing rhythm. We have this interesting saying that is used so much. We always use the expression "to keep time." And that's an interesting thing. And I think it almost sounded weird to me, because it sounds like time is something that we own, like a property or something. And I think it would be much better to say to make time or to create time than what we normally use, and also use as in teaching music, like everybody goes very harsh on the students, like sometimes, hey, you have to keep time here, because we use that expression. And I think that sometimes that destroys maybe a personal perception, a personal way of feeling music when you push too hard in that direction, I think. Just something that came to my mind now.
I think we're kind of back to that yin and yang thing. Certainly, if you're going to play music with other people, there's a certain rhythm, there's a certain time that you're in, and for your notes to make sense, to be a part of that conversation, you have to speak that language.
Right.
And you have to be speaking that language with the topic that you're talking about. So fair enough, there is that aspect.
Absolutely.
There's a place for keeping the time, and there's a place for making the time.
Right. I agree. But I think like this is not I think it can exist both at the same time. I think, like we speak together, and of course we speak in English, and but we have our own rhythm, just based, of course, because we're different humans, but then of course also because English is not my mother language. So that's also, I definitely have a different rhythmic flow through that.
It's curious expressing ourselves in a non-native tongue. There's a sense of pacing that's often different. I know for myself, there's a way of thinking that's different. There's ways I feel like different emotions come out or come up easier in one language than another. And sometimes if I'm having trouble thinking through a problem in English, I'll switch to Chinese and think about it in Chinese, because just the structure of the language makes me see the world a little bit differently.
Totally, yeah.
So there's that.
I totally agree. Yeah. And certain things are better expressed in another language, you know. I very often feel like I can, certain expressions, I really love English because I think it expresses it perfectly for me, much better than in my German dialect, that is my mother language. Or sometimes also like in Japanese or in Chinese, of course. There's a complete different quality in it, you know, a different layer also.
Yeah. Just lay down a different riff.
Right. Absolutely.
Lay down a different riff. I want to come back to rhythm.
Sure.
I want to come back to rhythm for just a moment. There's a friend of mine I've met through doing Qiological, Orin Kavitsi. He's a Japanese acupuncturist. He does this moxa method called ontake, which is a little bamboo. It's a piece of bamboo with moxa inside, and he taps it on people.
Interesting.
Right? And one of the things he'll do is he'll have different rhythmatic frequencies that he uses for different channels based on the work of Dr. Monica from Japan. And so part of the treatment that he does with the moxa is it's rhythmic. He taps on people with it.
Yep.
And different meridians have different frequencies that he'll work with. And I've worked with this a bit myself. And number one, it's fun. And there's not a lot of smoke, and it's warming in a very nourishing way. I find that my patients who I treat with this, they love it. They love the rhythm. They love the experience of being gently percussed with moxa. It has a very profound effect on them physiologically.
Totally. I mean, like if we think about like many other cultures, you know, in the world, music cultures, they have a complete different understanding of rhythm from our Western or Westernized understanding of rhythm, you know, and how we teach it and how we think about it, you know. Like I think it's something I criticize also a lot in basically most music programs in the whole world, because they kind of like are similar the more and more. And I mean, we always think from such a Western perspective, because when we think about like, if we think about all the music that exists in the whole world, maybe Western music is maybe not even 10%. And we teach wrong methods to understand rhythm. We teach rhythm through notation very often, because we have this, like we have the music score. So many people, like let's say classically trained musicians, they learn all the rhythms from reading music. And I mean, that's just I'm not saying this is not good that we have it, and I love the invention, of course, for being able to write music down. You know, that's an important tool, and it's also beautiful to transform music through the ages, because it's written down like a book, a notation. But on the other side, in terms of music and music that goes way deeper, notation is not adequate, because you cannot write certain things. You cannot write a personal awareness of rhythm that a musician has.
You cannot write a personal rhythm that a musician has. Again, I'm not a musician. Some years ago, I was so fascinated with the fantastic Afro-Cuban polyrhythms that come off of a conga drum. You know, they're
just amazing.
They're just amazing. And I remember
absolutely
taking lessons for a while and learning a little bit about that. And yeah, there's notation. There's your hands go like this. This is how it feels in your hand. Oh, no, here, cup your hand like this. Notice how that feels, right? And then you play, and you pay attention to your heartbeat. I guess we did pay attention to our heartbeat now that I think about it. And there's just a whole way of using your like your sensorium.
Right.
Like using your skin and body as an ear.
Absolutely.
To understand that stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. That's also like what Milford Graves again like talked so much about it. He talked about it like we have everything. Like we have everything because we don't have only our ears or our eyes. We have our skin. We can feel the vibrations from all the rhythms that are in nature, that are in the universe. We can feel them, and they are communicating with our body from the outside. And that's and of course our inner vibrations, they also go out. So it's something that we all have. Milford demonstrated this so beautifully once because he was a gardener also, like as I have said, he was a polymath, but he ate vegetables or leaves from the vegetables directly from the plant, like a cow. It's something so simple to think, but normally we don't do this because normally we pick away like the herbs that we use for cooking. We take away and we bring it to the kitchen, but already then it has lost the immediate connection to the plant. So if you really want to get the full energy and the full vibration of the plant, you should really get it when it's still at the plant. I found this beautiful because it's so simple and so obvious.
It's so simple and it's so obvious, but then again, it isn't.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's like when you see it, when you notice it, I guess that's where the cultivation comes in. I guess that's where noticing the periodicity of things and the rhythmic nature of things. I'm always a little changed by having a podcast conversation. I'll often say this at the end of a conversation about, wow, I'm going to have to take that into clinic and investigate it. It's great having a laboratory.
Of course.
That I get to work in. And now I'm really curious about what pulses will feel like for the rest of this week and maybe into the next few weeks, having had this conversation and just this sense. Maybe invite Milford in as well. His energy, see what shows up.
He's with us. Of course. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I just have one more question for you, and then we should probably wind it down. You're well-read. You're a curious fellow. You follow up on interesting things. I'd love to know what you're reading in Chinese medicine right now. What's got your attention?
Actually, I do two things. I go very consequently through the Ling Shu. I really go through all the chapters, and now I'm still at the beginning, but that was something that I kind of like want to do for this year. So I really want to go through all the chapters, and I write everything down, and things that I'm not sure about what it means, I bring into class with Z'ev as an example, or I talk with Stephen Cowan, and we exchange my questions that I have. This is one thing that I do because I definitely would like to get back and really deeper into the Neijing. So I will do the same if I can do it like with the Su Wen after. I can be very consequential in my work, and I like this. And then what I also have, what I just got, but I just started to look at it more deeply, is the new Dan Bensky translation from the Shanhan Lun that came out.
Oh, yes.
Yes, which seems to me very, very interesting. Yeah.
Well, do you know the story behind that one?
Please tell me.
So I think that was published last year,
right.
Or maybe the year
right.
before. I can't remember. Maybe, yeah, recently. So I went to school in 1995 to the Seattle Institute of Oriental Medicine, which it wasn't even accredited. I was in the second class. It was an experiment. I was in on the experiment. And The school was founded by Dan Bensky and Paul Karsten. Dan taught quite a bit. I was lucky I had him in the early years. And I don't know how long at that point he'd already been working with Dr. Ma on this book. He was working with Dr. Ma on this Shanghan Lun book, which I didn't know what that meant in the beginning, but then later you find out. And so that book is a conversation between Dr. Ma and Dan Bensky that spans like 30 years.
Wow.
It's a conversation between friends studying medicine together.
Beautiful.
And so it's a translation, but it's also clinical notes. And it's also, it captures the experience of two doctors. And I think Dan would probably say Dr. Ma is also his teacher, but I also know that they're friends. So it's true extraordinary practitioners in conversation over decades. That's what's in that book.
Wonderful. Wow. Yeah, I'm looking forward to dig in.
Oh, boy. Yeah. It's hard to be bored in a world that's this interesting.
It's true. It's true.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, Christoph, this has been a total delight. Thank you so much for spending a little time with me and the listeners today. I look forward to the next time our paths cross.
Yeah, absolutely likewise, Michael. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and I enjoy your work a lot, and thanks a lot for what you do for all the people interested in Chinese medicine. Thank you from my side.
Well, friends, that wraps up our conversation today with Christoph. What really struck me was how he experiences both music and medicine as practices of coherence, of tuning into rhythm, breath, and the subtle cues that guide toward connection. His reflection on musical improvisation mirrors so much of what we do in clinic, listening, adjusting, and responding in real time. I love the way he spoke about resonance, not just as a sound quality, but as a felt experience between practitioner and patient, a kind of together with sense of relating. There's something comforting in the idea that intuition, it isn't mysterious. It's trained, cultivated, and shaped over time, just like a musician develops their ear. If there's one thing that I take from this conversation, it's that healing often lives in the spaces between pulse and presence, silence and sensation, rhythm and rest. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, you'll probably also find delight in episode 383, Touching the Invisible with Chris McAllister. It's a conversation on practitioner presence and how touch can help patients unearth their own stories. There's episode 311, Principles, Methods, Knowing, and Know-How with Jason Robertson and Stephen Brown. It's a discussion on Li, the patterning or connective coherence that runs through creation. And then there's episode 394, Befriending Uncertainty with, yes, Stephen Cohen. This is a thoughtful look at childhood development, 5-phase constitutions, and how curiosity and presence help us navigate the spiral of growth, not only in children and clinical practice, but in ourselves as well. And there's plenty more over on the website. Do give it a visit. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.